Isn't it interesting how sometimes just a really well-timed joke can cut through all the noise, makes you see something serious completely differently?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of what we're diving into today, isn't it? This intersection of humor and, well, pretty heavy world issues.
Exactly. We're looking at this great article. It's called Lee Camp on Comedy, Capitalism, Gaza, and the Power of Irreverence. It's basically a conversation between Peter Joseph and Lee Camp.
Right. Lee Camp, the comedian and activist,
Yeah.
known for his very sharp socio-political stuff.
So our mission here is basically to pull out the key insights from their chat. You know, how comedy connects with media, capitalism, big global conflicts.
Sort of giving you the highlights, the core ideas, without you having to wade through everything, a shortcut to understanding some complex stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And this source, it's pretty wide-ranging, lots of different perspectives, some really surprising facts in there too. Okay, should we get into it?
Let's do it. So maybe start with Lee Camp himself, how he kind of moved from just doing stand-up into activism.
Right. It wasn't like flipping a switch, was it?
No, not at all. It sounds like it was more of a gradual thing, influenced by reading thinkers like Chomsky, Chris Hedges, people really digging into systemic problems.
And that shifted his comedy, right,
Yeah.
towards tackling those bigger issues.
Precisely. And that leads to this idea they discuss about comedy as a tool for truth. Camp talks about it sneaking behind the ego.
Yeah, I like the phrasing. It really paints a picture, doesn't it? Like truth in a clown suit, getting past your guard.
It's a great metaphor. Peter Joseph mentions the Trojan horse idea, too, which is similar.
Oh, right. The laughter is the horse.
Yeah, the appealing bit, the gift you accept. But inside, damn, there's this challenging idea, this critique that you might have just rejected if it came, straight at you.
That makes sense. And speaking of getting past defenses, let's talk about advertising. Camp really goes after it with satire.
He does. He exposes how, well, manipulative it often is. Playing on sex, shame, status, all that stuff.
It's funny, but also deeply uncomfortable when you, recognize the truth in it.
And his satire really highlights just how much of it there is, doesn't it? It's not just the obvious ads.
No, it's woven into everything. It shapes how we see ourselves, what we think we're supposed to want.
And connecting that to consumerism. It's not just selling, I don't know, soap. It's selling an entire lifestyle, a set of values, really.
It's so normalized now, isn't it? He has that analogy, like imagine someone just yelling ad slogans at you on the street.
You'd think they were completely nuts.
Right. But we just accept this constant stream of it through our screens and our feeds.
And this is where it gets tricky, because when you start questioning these systems, like Camp does,
Oh.
well, you can expect some pushback.
Oh, yeah. He definitely experienced that. The whole thing with RT America and outlets like the New York Times, NPR.
Calling him a Kremlin puppet. Which really brings up that whole issue of media framing, doesn't it? Who decides what's acceptable discourse?
Yeah, who gets to be seen as, a credible voice.
And this ties right into the concept they discuss, the Overton window.
Right, the Overton window. Explain that a little.
Well, it's basically the range of ideas the public is considered willing to accept at any given time. And the point Camp and Joseph make is that this window isn't just there. It's actively managed.
Managed by who? Media. Powerful interests.
Pretty much. Influential voices, media outlets, they can shape what falls inside or outside that window, often, in ways that protect the status quo, protect existing power structures.
So if you say something outside that accepted range...
You risk getting smeared, ignored, dismissed as fringe, or, well, a puppet. It's a way of controlling the debate.
And what's really interesting is how they suggest even comedy can play into this. Like late-night shows.
Yeah, that was a fascinating point. While those shows can offer commentary, sometimes they might just act as a sort of pressure release valve.
How so?
Well, you laugh at the absurdity, the corruption, whatever it is. You get that catharsis, that feeling of, yeah, someone sees it. But does it actually lead to challenging the underlying structures?
Or does it just make the outrage feel less urgent? Like, we've had our laugh, now back to normal.
Exactly. It can kind of neutralize the anger, potentially. So comedy that doesn't really bite, that doesn't challenge power.
It might end up just propping up the system it seems to be mocking.
That's the argument, yeah. It can become co-opted, part of the spectacle rather than a force for real change.
Okay, wow. So let's shift gears a bit because they get into some really heavy territory next. Israel and Gaza.
Right. And we need to be clear, we're reporting on what they discussed in the source material here. These are controversial points.
Understood. They bring up something called the Hannibal Directive.
Yes. which is described in their discussion as a reported Israeli military protocol. The idea being, apparently, that preventing a soldier from being captured alive is the priority, even if it means, well, even at the cost of that soldier's life.
That's incredibly controversial, obviously. Huge ethical questions there.
Absolutely. And that leads into an even more serious claim. They discuss reports from Israeli media and even officials allegedly admitting to incidents where Israeli forces may have harmed their own civilians during the events of October 7th.
And the point Camp and Joseph make is that this specific information, these alleged admissions, haven't really been prominent in Western media coverage.
Which, again, highlights how narratives get constructed around conflicts. What gets emphasized, what gets downplayed or omitted. It shapes public understanding massively.
They also talk about the language used, don't they? The difference between hostages and prisoners.
Yes, that's a key point. Israelis taken are consistently called hostages. Palestinians held by Israel, often for long periods, sometimes without charge, are usually termed prisoners.
Even minors sometimes.
Right. And that difference in wording, it carries a lot of weight. It frames the situation, frames the morality of it very differently for each group.
And then there was the propaganda around October 7th itself, like the beheaded babies story.
Which was widely debunked, yeah.
Yeah.
But they point out how, despite being discredited, that narrative kind of lingers in the public consciousness.
It shows the power of narrative warfare, doesn't it? Getting that initial emotional story out there, even if it's false. Controlling the moral high ground.
Absolutely. It's about framing, selective reporting, sometimes outright disinformation. All tools used to shape opinion and justify actions in conflict. It connects right back to controlling the narrative.
Okay, let's transition again. They move from that into a really interesting comparison. Capitalism versus state planning, using China as the main example.
Yeah, this part was quite provocative. They really question the sort of default assumption that free market capitalism is always the most efficient or superior system.
How so? What examples did they use?
Well, they point to things like China producing very affordable electric vehicles, like incredibly cheap ones compared to Western models, and advances in AI like DeepSeek.
Whereas the U.S. response is often tariffs,
Yeah,
bans.
exactly. Measures that seem designed to suppress that competition rather than, say, matching the innovation or affordability through different means. They argue China's state-directed approach, specific government policies, played a big role in making those EVs affordable.
And infrastructure, too, right? That was another comparison.
The idea that China tends to build infrastructure with a very long-term perspective, focusing on population needs, maybe less on immediate quarterly profits.
Compared to the U.S. model, which can seem more focused on short-term returns for shareholders.
That's the contrast they draw. And they make this other really interesting point about corporations themselves.
What about them?
Well, internally, big corporations are highly planned, hierarchical, cooperative structures.
Yeah.
Departments work together towards common goals.
Yeah, okay.
So that internal reality seems to contradict the external ideology of pure, chaotic competition that defines the free market. It leads them to this metaphor of the U.S. system sometimes acting like a capitalist Hunger Games.
Intense competition on the outside, but massive planned cooperation within the big players. That's the thought.
It is. It challenges you to think about how these systems actually function versus how they're described.
So, given all these big systemic issues, media control, economic models, conflict narratives, what about actually changing things? What about protest?
Right. Camp makes a really sharp distinction here between what he calls parades and real protests.
Parades, meaning like sanctioned marches?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Protests that are largely symbolic, maybe approved by the authorities, follow a set route, don't really disrupt anything fundamental. They happen, everyone goes home.
Performative, almost.
Perhaps. Whereas he argues that real protest, the kind that historically has forced change, is the kind that actually interrupts business as usual.
Like what? What kind of actions?
Think mass strikes, widespread non-cooperation, actions that genuinely get in the way of the system functioning, that disrupt the flow of commerce or power.
Yeah.
That's what forces those in charge to actually respond, not just tolerate a symbolic march.
So it has to have teeth, basically. It has to cause inconvenience or disruption to the powers that be.
That seems to be the core idea. And this connects, interestingly, back to where we started with comedy and irreverence. Their final point is about irreverence as resistance.
Yes. They quote Muhammad al-Kurd, right, from
Yeah.
Perfect Victims.
They do. It's a powerful quote. Irreverence is a dignifying act of refusal, a stubborn rejection of psychological subjugation.
Wow. Say that again. A dignifying act of refusal.
A stubborn rejection of psychological subjugation.
That really hits home. So, finding humor, refusing to be just a passive victim, refusing to take the oppressors entirely seriously, that's an act of power in itself.
That's the idea. It's about preserving your own dignity, your humanity,
Mhm.
resisting that psychological weight of oppression. Comedy, irreverence, becomes a way to keep your spirit alive, to imagine freedom even when things look bleak.
It's like a form of mental or spiritual self-defense.
Exactly. It's refusing to let them crush your spirit, keeping that spark of defiance alive through laughter, through refusing to grant them ultimate seriousness.
So, wrapping this all up then, what are the main threads we've pulled?
Well, definitely the power of comedy and irreverence, not just for laughs, but as serious tools for critique and resistance.
Right. And the critique of capitalism, questioning its sufficiency, suggesting it can be maybe more chaotic than planned economies in some ways.
The critical look at media narratives, the Overton window, how language shapes our perception of conflicts.
Mm-hmm. And finally, this distinction between symbolic protest and genuinely disruptive action needed for real change.
And underlying it all is this interplay of power, narrative control, and, well, the human spirit's ability to push back, often using humor as a shield and a weapon.
It really makes you reconsider the role humor plays, doesn't it? Not just in entertainment, but in how you process the world, how you maybe resist things you disagree with.
And how much those media stories we consume every day are really shaping our views, maybe in ways we don't even notice.
Definitely food for thought. So here's something maybe for you, the listener, to chew on. How does finding humor, even in dark or difficult times, actually work as a form of psychological freedom?
Yeah, think about it. When has laughter in the face of something hard felt like liberation, or maybe even the seed of wanting things to be different? Can you think of examples in your own life or things you've seen where that power of irreverence really shone through?